how responsible are we for the things that we do? Now, the answer might seem obvious. If we make a decision and we act and we're held responsible, we pay the consequences. What we do is ultimately up to us, and we are accountable, especially before God. However, have you ever thought about the things that you do, how much of that is not based on choices you make, but perhaps it's just because of the way that you're made? You might be stubborn, hard-headed, but you come from a long line of stubborn and hard-headed people. My dad was stubborn and hard-headed. My grandfather was stubborn and hard-headed. My great-great-grandpappy was stubborn and hard-headed. Why should I be held responsible for simply carrying out the genetics? It's the way I'm made. And ultimately, who made me this way? Well, I didn't make myself. It was God. Now, that's how we argue. That's what we say. And that's what Paul addresses here in Romans chapter 9 as we're in day 3 of the 4th week of our journey through Romans and Galatians as part of our Idols of the Heart series. In Romans chapter 9, Paul even addresses this where he says, where people will say, how can God then find fault? Aren't we just doing what he has made us to do? And then he says, may it never be. How can the creature say to the Creator, why did you make me this way? And so then Paul goes on to talk about the potter and the clay and how the potter has the right to make out of the clay whatever he wants. And really what this is saying is it's not saying that God makes some people in a way that it is impossible for them to respond to his grace. That's not what it's saying. But what it is saying is that God uses the way that every person is made, both our good and bad qualities, and he's able to use those things to achieve his greater purposes. That's why he talked about Pharaoh. In the book of Exodus, Pharaoh is said to have hardened his own heart, and then it said that God hardened his heart. Now, which is it? Well, it's both. Pharaoh was a hard-hearted guy, and so God gave him over to the choices that he made. Pharaoh did not receive mercy. Pharaoh received justice. That's why Paul goes on here in chapter 9 to talk about how God is so patient with those who are destined for destruction. And it's like we're saying, well, God is causing them to be destroyed. It's not the case at all. When you think about this, God appeals and appeals and appeals to people. He speaks and he speaks and he calls out to them. Whenever they harden their hearts and they refuse to believe, that is not God's fault. And yet God is able to use the hardness of their hearts to achieve his greater purposes. It's like we always think about in Romans 8:28, that verse that God causes all things to work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purposes. Well, part of the way that God brings that about is through people. And one of the ways that he does that is by using the way that people are made, the way that people are. And he's able to use those things, use those qualities for his greater purposes. Just like he did with Pharaoh. With this hardness of Pharaoh's heart, that God was able to demonstrate the greatness of his power, to show how he is God over all things. And whenever he broke the greatest nation on earth, it left no doubt that God alone is the God of the universe. And God still does that today. Now, the rest of the story in Romans 9 is not so much that, how can the creature say to the Creator, why did you make me this way? But it's more getting to the point of the fact that there were those who tried through the law to justify themselves, but the way that we can find God is by his grace and his mercy through faith. And that the door has been opened up to us Gentiles, those of us who are not Jews, that God is eager to save. See, the question, this passage does not tell us God causes some people to refuse him. Instead, what it's saying is that by God's mercy, he opens up the door so the greatness of his grace can be shown to those who receive his mercy and say yes to him and are saved forever.